both these matters is something members on this side, I know, as stakeholders alike, are deeply troubled by. Thank you.
Amendment 20 proposed to clause 24 is on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Hosey. It's a pleasure to be serving under your chairmanship again today. Can I begin by thanking my honourable friend for her kind words at the beginning of her remarks about my own long-standing efforts in respect of the public advocate, all of which have arisen out of my experience as a constituency MP seeking to represent some of the Hillsborough families, the bereaved, those families of those who were killed, but also survivors of Hillsborough. And we often forget survivors. There were very many thousands of people in the ground on that day who saw what happened and subsequently were pretty traumatised, some of whom have been in a terrible state for many years. I still meet people who tell me what happened to them on that day and tell me that they've never told anybody in the intervening 34 years. So one can imagine the state that some of those people are in terms of their mental health, particularly when there's been a cover-up that has lasted for so many years, seeking to blame fans for what happened rather than to accept responsibility, which we must remember within 4 months of the disaster was by the first interim report of the first public inquiry placed squarely upon the shoulders of the police, something which they never accepted, something which they then chose to campaign to overturn. And when I first met my constituents as an MP in 1997, I'd known some of them beforehand as a lawyer, but when I first met them in 1997, those who were my constituents, the first thing they said to me was that the police had used the inquests to overturn the Taylor inquiry. And of course I took the lawyer's response. I said, oh no, inquests have a different purpose. But I quickly understood what they meant when I saw what had happened. And in reality, the cover-up at Hillsborough began on the day, and it was then pursued at great cost and expense, using taxpayers' money over decades. And in fact, at the second inquest, the same points were being put by the police lawyers. And even now, one hears similar arguments being put. It was the Liverpool fans. They were ticketless, they were drunk. They were pushed their way into the ground, they killed their own. One even hears it in the chants, which mercifully the FA are now trying to deal with at grounds, the tragedy chanting as it's known, which happens and is done to Liverpool fans all over the country. So this kind of issue can have resonance for decades, for many, many thousands of people. That is why I'm convinced we must, as a society, seek to get the aftermath of disasters right. If we can stop things going wrong as they have with Hillsborough, we can save a lot of money, we can save a lot of heartache. We can certainly make sure that the families of those killed in disasters who are facing the worst moments of their lives suddenly, in the full glare of publicity, don't have also to deal with public authorities' intent upon not getting at the truth, finding out what happened to their loved ones or supporting them in every way possible, but in some cases trying to blame them for what happened. In all cases that I've come across, trying to make sure that they themselves don't get the blame, because it's that defensiveness that often drives the behaviour of public authorities in the aftermath of disasters. Now, that is why I rise, Mr Hosey, to support Amendments 20 and Amendments 21 moved by my honourable friend. I believe that Clause 24 at present does present way too much discretion, total discretion, to the Secretary of State, with no kind of requirement about what he should consider in making the appointment, no kind of requirement that he should consult those affected. And in my experience of disasters, and it's not just the Hillsborough disaster that I've had to deal with as a constituency MP, there have been others, the MV Derbyshire, which was a disaster that happened long before I became an MP, the Alderhay organ scandal, that was another one that I had to deal with, the Manchester Arena bombing, I have constituents affected by that as well, and a number of other disasters that have happened during my time in this House. There are issues that are always the same, and that is getting the trust of those affected. The Secretary of State gaining that trust from them is an incredibly important part of making sure things don't go wrong. And so I think something that requires the Secretary of State to appoint an advocate, thus removing his discretion. I mean, we're going to have an argument, a discussion later on, Mr Hosey, about whether or not the advocate should be a standing appointment. And on balance, I think it should be. But if it's going to be an ad hoc appointment, then I think the Secretary of State shouldn't have the discretion not to appoint where there's a major incident. There should always be an appointment. So I support Amendment 20. And there's also an issue about how we define major incident. I always think of these things as public disasters where a number of people have died. That's my definition. But the government has chosen to define it slightly differently. No doubt the Minister will be able to enlighten us when we come to him about precisely how the government see that phrase being interpreted. But I think anything that can just give the families some comfort that the Secretary of State is acting in their interests, not in an unfettered, with unfettered powers and not without having to discuss things with them, would be an advance on the current drafting. And so for those reasons, Mr Hosey, I support these amendments.
Thank you very